The President of the United States is one of the most recognizable political offices in the world. The President is both head of state and head of government, meaning the role combines symbolic national leadership with direct responsibility for running the executive branch. In some countries, those jobs are split between a ceremonial president or monarch and a prime minister who manages government. In the United States, they are concentrated in one elected office. That is why the president can represent the nation at a state ceremony one day, respond to a domestic crisis the next, and make decisions about military or foreign policy soon after. But the presidency is not simply a throne with democratic branding. It is a constitutional office, built inside a system designed to divide power. To understand the president, you have to understand both sides of the job, the enormous authority attached to the office, and the limits that Congress, the courts, elections, law, and political reality place around it. The constitutional foundation of the presidency is Article 2 of the United States Constitution. Article 2 establishes the executive branch and vests executive power in the president. In plain terms, that means the president is responsible for carrying out and enforcing federal law. Congress writes laws, but the executive branch administers them through departments, agencies, officials, and federal employees. This makes the president the central figure in a vast administrative system that touches nearly every area of national life, from border enforcement and environmental regulation to disaster response, public health, national security, and financial oversight. The Constitution does not list every modern duty in detail, because the government of the 18th century was far smaller than the government of today. Instead, it creates the office, assigns core responsibilities, and leaves later generations to define many practical details through legislation, precedent, court decisions, and political norms. One of the president's most important responsibilities is directing the executive branch of the federal government. This branch includes major departments such as State, Treasury, Defense, Justice, Homeland Security, and many others. The president does not personally manage every decision inside these institutions, but sets priorities, appoints leaders, and expects the machinery of government to carry out an agenda. Cabinet secretaries and agency heads become essential because they translate presidential goals into policy. A president who wants to change immigration enforcement, financial regulation, health policy, or climate rules often works through the agencies that already have legal authority in those areas. This is why presidential elections matter even when Congress does not pass major new laws. A change in administration can change enforcement priorities, regulatory strategy, diplomatic tone, and the interpretation of existing law. The president is also commander-in-chief of the United States Armed Forces. This phrase is short, but its consequences are enormous. It means civilian control over the military is placed in the elected president, not in generals or admirals. The president can direct military strategy, respond to threats, and make decisions involving the deployment of forces. At the same time, the Constitution gives Congress major war powers, including the power to declare war, raise and support armies, provide funding, and regulate the armed forces. In practice, the balance has often been contested. Modern presidents have ordered military operations without formal declarations of war, while Congress has tried at times to assert oversight through funding decisions and war powers legislation. The office carries special weight because the United States maintains the world's most expensive military and a nuclear arsenal second only in size to one other country. Foreign policy is another area where the modern presidency is especially powerful. The Constitution gives the president authority to receive ambassadors, appoint ambassadors with Senate confirmation, and make treaties with the advice and consent of the Senate. Over time, laws passed by Congress, global crises, and the rise of the United States as a superpower have made the president the primary face of American foreign policy. Presidents meet with foreign leaders, negotiate international agreements, impose or lift certain sanctions under legal authority, and decide how the United States responds to conflicts and alliances. During much of the 20th century, especially in the Cold War, the president was often described as the leader of the free world. That phrase reflected the United States' role in a global ideological struggle, but it also revealed how far the presidency had expanded beyond its early domestic focus. At home, the president plays a major role in legislation, even though Congress is the branch that writes and passes federal laws. Article 1, Section 7 of the Constitution gives the president the power to sign bills into law or veto them. A veto can be overridden by Congress, but only with a high threshold, two-thirds support in both the House and the Senate. That makes the veto a powerful bargaining tool. Presidents also shape legislation before it reaches their desk. They propose budgets, announce policy priorities, negotiate with lawmakers, and use public speeches to pressure Congress. The State of the Union Address is one of the clearest examples of this agenda-setting role. The president cannot simply command Congress to act, but as the most visible national political figure, the president can define what issues receive attention and what compromises become politically possible. The president's influence over domestic policy has grown partly because modern presidents are usually seen as leaders of their political parties. In the early constitutional design, parties were not fully built into the system, but in modern politics they are unavoidable. A president's party often organizes around the president's agenda, and members of Congress from that party may depend on the president's popularity, fundraising ability, and voter turnout operation. This does not mean lawmakers always obey the White House. Members of Congress have their own districts, states, ambitions, and ideological commitments. But presidential elections now serve as national signals about policy direction. When voters choose a president, they are often choosing a broader approach to taxes, regulation, courts, social policy, immigration, foreign affairs, and the role of government itself. When Congress is divided, slow, or unwilling to act, presidents often turn to executive tools. Executive orders are directives from the president to the executive branch. They cannot legally create unlimited power or override the Constitution, but they can guide how agencies enforce laws, manage federal operations, or implement existing authority. Agency regulations can also shape policy in highly technical but meaningful ways. For example, a law may tell an agency to protect public health, oversee markets, or enforce workplace standards, but the details are often written through regulations. Judicial appointments are another long-term presidential power. Federal judges, including Supreme Court justices, can influence law for decades after the president who appointed them leaves office. This is one reason modern presidents can shape domestic policy not only through immediate actions, but through institutions that outlast their term. The presidency was not always as large or visible as it is today. George Washington took office in 1789 as the first president, and many early precedents were shaped by his choices. He helped define the cabinet, the peaceful transfer of power, and the idea that the president should be powerful enough to govern but restrained enough not to become a monarch. Over time, presidential power rose and fell depending on wars, economic crises, political movements, and the personalities of individual presidents. The growth accelerated in the 20th century as the United States became a global power and the federal government became more involved in economic and social life. Franklin D. Roosevelt's presidency during the Great Depression and World War II greatly expanded expectations for presidential leadership. Later, the presidency of George W. Bush after the September 11 attacks expanded national security authority in important ways. Even with all this power, the president is constrained by the separation of powers. Congress controls federal spending, passes laws, confirms many major appointments, and can investigate the executive branch. The Senate must confirm ambassadors, cabinet officers, many regulatory officials, and federal judges. The courts can rule that presidential actions violate statutes or the Constitution. Federal agencies themselves operate under laws that presidents may dislike but still must follow. Public opinion also matters. A president with low approval can struggle to persuade Congress, influence allies, or maintain political momentum. Elections are the ultimate democratic check, but between elections, the press, civil society, state governments, inspectors general, courts, and congressional oversight all play roles in limiting or challenging presidential authority. The presidency is powerful, but it exists inside a constitutional ecosystem that constantly tests the boundaries of that power. Presidents are elected to 4-year terms through the Electoral College, not by a direct national popular vote. Voters in each state choose electors, and those electors formally choose the president and vice president. The system can make state-by-state outcomes more important than the national vote total, which is why campaigns focus intensely on competitive states. The vice president is elected alongside the president and is first in the line of succession. Succession is not just theoretical. 9 vice presidents have become president because a president died in office or resigned. This makes the vice presidency more than a backup title. It is part of the continuity plan for the executive branch, ensuring that the office remains occupied even during national trauma, assassination, illness, or political crisis. The 22nd Amendment, ratified in 1951, limits a person elected president twice from being elected to a third term. This rule was adopted after Franklin D. Roosevelt won 4 presidential elections, breaking the earlier 2-term tradition set by Washington. The amendment reflects a central tension in American politics. Presidents need enough time and authority to lead, but the system is wary of allowing one person to hold executive power indefinitely. As of the current 60th 4-year presidential term, 45 individuals have served across 47 presidencies, with Donald Trump listed as the 47th and current president since January 20, 2025. The numbers tell a larger story. The presidency is an office built on continuity and change at the same time. Each president inherits constitutional powers, historical precedents, global responsibilities, and domestic expectations, then leaves behind new precedents for the next person to use, challenge, or expand. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.